Well, welcome back, folks. Today we're going to talk about the carburetor off the 8N, as well as a little conversation about carbon buildup. We'll start with the carburetor. As you can see here, I pulled the float bowl off the carburetor. This is a typical Marvel Shibboleth. I think you can see the name right there. By the way, Marvel Shibboleth is still in business. They started in the early 20th century, automotive, of course. Were part of Borg-Warner. They might still be, I'm not sure about that. They are still making carburetors, to my knowledge, primarily for the light aircraft industry. The small, usually privately owned planes, but in fact, I think they are called the Marvel Shibboleth Carburetor Company or something to that effect. They merged with Tillotson, I think in the early 70s. Most of us are familiar with Tillotson carburetors from lawnmowers and small engines that are used typically in lawn maintenance. Anyway, cast iron body. So for those of you that are familiar with motorcycle carburetors, which I typically would work on, this is different from that because those are usually an alloy of some type. Obviously this isn't. It's quite clean, as you can see there. I do believe my neighbor opened this up just to clean it out, and a couple of things tell me that. Number one, it's so clean, and number two, the screws, these are the screws right here, there's 4 of them that hold the float bowl onto the body of the carburetor. Show, I don't know if you can see that right there, tooling marks. And I think he opened up just to clean it, but other than that, it's as I opened it up. You can see the little temporary fuel line I rigged up earlier so that I can use my small auxiliary fuel tank. I'm just going to leave that on for now. Now my intentions with this carburetor are not to rebuild it or do anything further with it at this time. The reason I opened it up is I just want to see what it looked like and how clean it was. Now eventually I will probably end up rebuilding it, but it was working fine. And I'm not going to get too many things going, too many changes, get ahead of myself. I have not started the engine yet from the valve job, and you get too many changes going on and something goes wrong and the engine doesn't start or run right, and you've worked with too many different systems on the tractor, then it becomes a matter of trying to figure out what went wrong. So I'm only going to put this back together and put it back on the tractor, and eventually, undoubtedly, I'll come back and clean it up, probably rebuild it. By the way, when I talk about rebuilding a carburetor, that usually does not include replacing jets. I don't find that jets usually need to be replaced, but certainly gaskets and a thorough cleaning, probably a painting, and get it back in as perfect as I can get it. But that'll be a project for another day. That will not be part of the initial startup of the tractor. Maybe next summer, maybe next winter. Frankly, I don't know right now. But anyway, that's what it looks like. Pretty typical in terms of design, outside of being a cast iron body. There are a couple things I did notice right away. One, right here, that is the choke butterfly return spring that's broken, as well as on the bottom of the bowl, you can see a hole right there that goes right through. My thumb is. There's supposed to be a screen there of some kind to filter, this for overflow, of course, to filter or prevent contaminants from getting up into the system, I'm sure. And both of those parts are still available. In fact, almost everything for these carburetors is still available. All the individual pieces, the gaskets, the jets if you want them. That screen is available, that spring is available. I've already checked on that. I haven't ordered them yet, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. So that's what the carburetor looks like. It's reasonably clean. It's heavy. Physically it's very heavy because that's a cast iron. It's an updraft carburetor, so it mounts to the bottom of the intake manifold like that. But pretty typical, I would say. And it works, or at least it did, so I'm not going to go any further with that right now. What I would like to do now is transition over to talking about carbon buildup in the engine. And in order to facilitate that, I'm going to have to do, I think, a voiceover with some screenshots or photos that I took earlier of the cylinder head, and then we'll come back over here and talk a little further about carbon. This image is of the top of the engine right after I had removed the cylinder head a while back. You have seen this before in one of my previous videos, and I wanted to return to this to talk about carbon buildup. If you also recall from the previous video, I had mentioned that cylinders 3, which is this one here, this is number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Cylinders 3 and 4 were particularly light on compression, though the engine did run okay and it started fine. But look at number 4 right here in the carbon on both the top of the piston as well as around the valves. And number 3 shows a little bit of that same thing, especially around the valves. Now, carbon is a natural result of burning hydrocarbons, gasoline for instance. So you do expect some carbon buildup. But there are many causes of this kind of condition. And again, for those of you that have been with me for a while, you're familiar with the fact that I've worked on a lot of different engines in my life, all the way from automobiles, which I don't do much of anymore. In fact, I don't do any work on automobiles anymore, all the way down to every piece of lawn equipment imaginable, both 2-stroke and 4-stroke. Most of my time has been spent on lawn equipment and motorcycles, but I've worked on just about everything you can think of in the last 50 plus years. So I'm very familiar with carbon and the causes of carbon. And typically, carbon, there's no mystery to it. You're going to have some natural result of burning fuels that I just mentioned. Also, a worn engine, rings, valve seals, valve guides, which I suspect might be going on over in here on 3 and 4. We'll come back to that in a moment. Rich carburation or fuel system running on the rich side, giving the engine too much fuel. Spark plugs, and I could keep going with all of those, and probably one that a lot of people don't think about that I suspect is relevant to this engine is the engine is running too cool. And what I mean by that is an engine to be efficient needs to run reasonably hot, within its operating parameters, of course. The thermostat in this engine is, originally was a 160-degree thermostat, which is quite cool by modern standards. Most engines today run 180, 200, 220, somewhere in that range. And I understand it's because of the cool thermostat, 160 degree, that's Fahrenheit, is because of the antifreeze that was used at the time this engine was built was alcohol-based. That's what you see out there on the internet if you research it. So I'm going to go with that. I don't know anything different. But even at 160 degrees, that's cool, certainly by modern standards. And I suspect one of the things that goes on with these little tractors is that they're real sensitive to overfilling of the radiator. And people will top off, they probably were topping off the radiators at the time, right up to the bottom of the filler neck, which inevitably will cause an overflow condition. These cooling systems on these tractors are going to be sensitive to overfilling, and when you overfill, they spill it out, they purge it, and people see antifreeze being purged, and they think, oh my goodness, the engine's overheating and it's running too hot. And I think what they then do is they automatically, or in many cases, go in and pull the thermostat out, which actually is the wrong thing to do in my opinion, and cause the engine to actually run cooler than it should, which will lead to carbon buildup. You're supposed to fill the radiators in these machines to just cover the core. You're not supposed to fill it all the way to the bottom of the filler neck, which most people probably did. Spewed out the antifreeze. Oh, my engine's running hot. Pull the thermostat, and it runs too cool and never really gets to a proper operating temperature. That will lead to carbon buildup. And I have a suspicion that is part of what's going on here. There could be a number of impacts here, though, of course. Besides, I know the thermostat had been pulled out, so I suspect or believe the engine's running cooler than it was designed to. Number two, I think carburation might be a little on the rich side. We'll take a look at the spark plugs here in a few minutes. I'm going to go back to the overhead shot on the bench. I suspect the carburation wasn't adjusted just right. And I also think that there's some wear in the engine, in particular probably the valve guides and the seals. The intake valve in these engines, which is a larger, so this is an intake, that's an intake right there, that's an intake, and this is an intake. The larger valves have seals in the valve guide. The exhaust valves, the smaller of the valves here, do not. But when we take a closer look at the intake and exhaust valve on number 4, they're both very carbon up, and more so than the other 3 cylinders, which leads me to believe that we have probably leaky seal over here in the valve guide. Might be a little weak in the piston rings, though it didn't really demonstrate that when I did the compression test that pointed to the valves. Valve seats weren't bad on this cylinder. The worst valve seats, by the way, on cylinder number 2 right here. But anyway, this helps us diagnose what's going on. In terms of carbon buildup on number 1 and number 2, those would probably be more typically what I would expect to see in an engine of this age that probably didn't have the best quality of fuels, which can contribute to this problem, that is carbon buildup. Probably didn't have the best quality fuels, running on the cool side. This would be about what I would expect, but when you get down in here, it's noticeably different than the cylinders 1 and 2. Now we're going to take a look at the cylinder head. Again, you've seen the shot before in a previous video. This is just a still I extracted from that video. Again, on the far left is cylinder number 4, 3, 2, and 1. You see corresponding heavy carbon buildup here. Those scratch marks right there were just me fiddling around. I think I used a screwdriver to see how easily the carbon came off. Originally it looked something like this over in this section, but so 3 and 4, especially 4, is the heaviest carbon accumulation. 1 and 2, again, probably what I would have expected, given the age of this engine, and my suspicion is it probably has never been opened up before. This is just a shot. Again, I think you've seen this before in a previous video of the same cylinder head, now cleaned up. And I cleaned the mating surface to the head gasket well, of course, and then cleaned the combustion chambers. Ran a chase through the spark plug holes to make sure they were good and clean. They're not damaged. They're in good condition to hold the spark plug. But this is just the post cleaning I wanted to share with you. So now let's go back over to the overhead shot on the bench, and we're going to take a look at the spark plugs that came out of this engine, as well as talk about the valves just a little bit. Then after that, we'll wrap up the video. We're going to take a quick look at the spark plugs here. These are as they came out of the machine. I don't remember. I didn't keep track of which was which, to be honest with you. I probably should have, but I don't know how well you can see those. But they're all pretty much equivalent in terms of wear and debris contamination. I think, let's see, this one, these two, probably the worst of the 4. They look a bit oil foul to me, and that would make sense if these are 3 and 4, and again, I'm not sure about that, but because I think we had bad valve seals or something going on with cylinders 3 and 4. Again, it could be rings. I don't think that's it right now, but could be. But they look a little oil foul to me. They're much too dark, and or again, the combination of oil fouled, carburetor isn't adjusted just right, and poor quality fuel, engine running too cool, etc. But all 4 of them are a little bit too darker than they should be. So they worked fine. Here's the valves out of cylinder 4. So again, this is the intake, the larger of the 2, and this is the exhaust. And the reason one's still in its cartridge state, that is, with all assembled with the spring, and the other one isn't. This one I had to cut. This is one of those I had to cut the spring off to get it apart, so I can literally pull the valve out. There is a little wear there. I can feel it in the fit of the valve stem to the valve guide. Again, this is the intake, so you can see the seal right there, that black ring. That's the oil seal. And the exhaust does not have an oil seal. They use the same guide, but if you're going to use it for an intake, you put a seal on it. If you're going to use it for exhaust, you don't. But you can see they're both very heavily carboned up, much more so than the other 3 cylinders. You can see on the bottom here a lot of carbon. I think you can probably see that. And again, I suspect that's oil. It's from oil, but it could be from an overly rich mixture and the engine not just running hot enough to try to keep itself clean. So there's a little snapshot of the carburetor, which we talked about a few minutes ago. The review of the cylinder before I clean the carbon off, very carboned up. And the spark plugs and the valves from number 4, which was one of the weakest of the 4 cylinders. So now I'm going to put the carburetor back together, and then obviously I'm going to button up the tractor and try to get it started from the valve job, and then we'll proceed to other projects from there. That's going to be it for the video today, folks. Any issues, questions, thoughts, drop me a note. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching.